right, welcome to the Too Long Don't Listen podcast. This is the PMM series where I speak with amazing product marketing managers and leaders who can share their experience and career path with us. Today, I have Haya Barles join me on this episode recording. Um, I'm gonna let her introduce herself because she has a pretty rich experience, and then we're gonna start the Q&A. So Hiya, welcome, and how are you?
Hey, Sanda, thanks so much for having me. Yes, I'm doing really well. How are you?
I'm doing great. As I was telling you, I'm surviving the cold here in New York, but it's so far so good. I'd
Yeah.
love for you to tell us more about your PMM career, what you're up to now, and yeah, how's everything going in your product marketing world?
Yeah, absolutely. At the moment in product marketing, I'm currently head of product marketing at JustGiving. So, some of your listeners might be familiar with the platform, but if not, JustGiving is a fundraising platform that's used by tens of thousands of fundraisers, donors, and charities every day. And, maybe some of your listeners will have used the platform to fundraise for a cause that's close to their hearts. But my role really centers around rallying together teams and working with our fantastic product and tech teams to build and launch features that enable both fundraisers, so individuals like you and I, and also like charities to raise money for the causes that really matter most to them. So a lot of my time is also focused on insight gathering when it comes to our customers and competitors and market as a whole, and using that to really inform and drive forward just giving strategies. So it's a really interesting role. It's also a B2B and B2C facing role, which is, more unusual for us product marketers, right? We're typically quite B2B focused. So I love that variety as well, because I think it's given me quite an opportunity to bring that more human messaging that you usually see in B2C brands to the B2B side of things. So yeah, I'm really enjoying what I'm doing at the moment. Prior to this, I was at Blackbaud, which is JustGiving's umbrella company. So there I launched their European product marketing function. And that was a more kind of traditional B2B SaaS role in a sense, which gave me a great grounding, I have to say, for the entire product marketing skill set. So yeah, that gives you a little bit of a history, hopefully.
Yeah, that's great. And thank you for giving us more insights on what Just Giving is. Just as a side note, and I know I didn't tell you this before the recording, I love Just Giving because when
Yeah.
I ran my first ever marathon 2 years ago, I was able to raise I'm gonna say a lot of money thanks to Just Giving for cancer research, which is a cause that is very
Amazing.
close to my heart. So this is, I'm a bit nostalgic doing talking about Just Giving with you and getting to learn from a product marketer who works there is great. It's amazing for me right now. So this is
Wonderful.
just me getting excited.
Yeah.
So I'd love to learn more about your product marketer path. So how did you get into the role? How did you learn about what product marketing was, and then become a head of PM at your current company?
Yeah, sure. Um, I might actually should I start from the start? Because I've pivoted a few times in my career.
Let's
So
do it.
yeah, so I think my first job was actually agency side. So I started at a marketing agency in London. All of our clients were boutique hotels. It was a very fun first job to have. I won't lie, like a lot of travel, a lot of client interaction. I actually started on a rotation program there, and I started in sales, and God, that gave me a lot of respect for my sales colleagues because sales is tough. Cold calling. I had so many phones slammed down in my face. I cried a lot. I really did cry a
Oh
lot.
no.
I did not think I would make it through my probation, but somehow I did. And in retrospect, I think having that hands-on sales experience for as a product marketer is so valuable, right? Because it gives you such a deep understanding of the sales process, and it really helps you put yourself in salespeople's shoes. But soon enough I found my happy place on the marketing team, and at that time, I mean, God, I dread to think how many years ago that was now. So this was about 15 years ago. We were asking ourselves questions like, do we really need social media accounts for our clients? We were just
Sure.
learning what SEO was. So it was like kind of like the beginnings of digital marketing in a sense. And then, I lost someone very close to me in my family, and that kind of like flipped things for me. I moved from London to Scotland absolutely overnight. And after some much needed time out, I just kind of needed to reflect and like pivot my career. So at this point, I was like 3 years into my career, and the job market in Edinburgh was pretty small. This was pre, remote working, etc. So I kind of had to think outside of the box, and I decided, you know what, I still want to be near family, so I'm going to freelance, and I'm just going to kind of make it work somehow. So I went to as many networking events as I could. I had business cards with me at the time that I designed myself, and I just spoke to as many people as I could and networked my way basically into landing my first marketing contractor role. And from there, it just grew, and I really found my niche within like luxury products and luxury hotels, working with small to medium brands. And I think that was a really interesting lesson, right? Because you just need to prioritize your personal brand sometimes, and the value in just like putting yourself out there and silencing that imposter syndrome is so, so important. And I think often we deprioritize making time for ourselves when it comes to like networking and attending events. And a lot of us cringe at the thought of networking too, right? I think like networking has like a bad reputation in that sense, but it's so enriching. I mean, it's all about community and like building relationships at the end of the day, right? I mean, that's why you and I are here as well, but
Yeah.
events. So, you know, um, anyway, from there, grew my consulting practice, fast forward. And actually, what interestingly like spun my like changed my like kind of second pivot, I guess, was I was volunteering at an organization called the Shrub Cooperative in Edinburgh. I'd started to get more interested in environmental and sustainability issues. I think, I got a little bit disillusioned, to be quite honest, working in like the luxury and travel sector. And I took on a head of marketing role there as a contractor. And that like flipped things for me career wise. Like to be at a mission focused organization was like, I mean, it sounds obvious, but I think until you do it and just feeling the contrast of like the two sectors, yeah, it was very, very eye opening for me. And I knew from there that I wanted to change direction. And then, that was my first experience, I guess, of like rebranding myself almost. As product
Mhm.
marketers, we're always repositioning products, but I was faced with a situation where I had to reposition like myself almost because I had all this luxury experience, but I wanted to change direction. So I really focused in on all of my voluntary and nonprofit experience and landed what was a product marketing role. But again, this was 10 years, almost 10 years ago now. So it was marketed just as a broad digital marketing role within the ed tech sector. So I was at a company called TES, which was the Times newspaper's education supplement. So it was part of the Times newspaper group, and they spun out into a tech company. So I was first there in quite a hybrid product marketing and digital and growth marketing role. And like I fell in love with product marketing from there. And I knew that my subsequent moves, I wanted to get more and more specialized in product marketing. And from there, I went to Blackbot and now we're just moving. So, it's been a lot of variety, but I think we sometimes can pigeonhole ourselves. And like reflecting back, a big lesson for me is that you should completely firstly like follow your gut. I went to business school. A lot of my peers were going into like consulting and banking. I was like the oddball who wanted to go into marketing, and I stuck to my guns with that. And also I think throughout our career we can sometimes feel pigeonholed, right?
Mhm.
And from my experience, like you can 100% pivot. I've like pivoted 2 or 3 times, and there's also a huge difference between like changing direction and versus being like indecisive and unfocused. And I think that comes from being really intentional and reflective, right? Like I think always asking yourself why and what you like about a role and what you like about a sector, which like let's be honest, in the day to day, we don't often get to do that, right? And also what you don't like and what feels missing. And I think actually that diversity of experience and exposure to different industries is often like how I step out of the box and like come up with some of my best ideas. So I found that variety very, very valuable. Sorry, I've given you my like autobiography.
Man, don't apologize. I'm so happy you did. Your experiences, this is what I love about asking such a simple question, but then there's so much to unpack. Looking at your LinkedIn profile, I could see that you had different experiences in different sectors, but when you put it in such a beautiful story, it makes more sense to understand your intentions and what drives you. What I love the most is that you started in sales and you're like, okay, I belong in marketing. And
Oh,
then I'm
not
very curious.
not.
Yeah, very curious to learn more about your freelancing days because I've met a couple of freelancers who usually offer marketing services, but for you, it sounds like you did you figure out that you wanted to work in luxury? How did that specialization happen, or
Yeah,
how did you reposition your services in a way?
yeah, absolutely. So I think, I mean, I've always been a very creative person, and working in the luxury sector, like the really like fun side of it is like the sheer level of creativity, right? It allows you. And really that was the driving force for me. And I interned in the hotel sector. And then from there, my first job was at this hotel marketing agency. And really that was what built up my experience within the luxury sector, because not only was I working in luxury travel, but a lot of the partnerships we did were often with other luxury good brands. So that was what kind of spurred my experience. And I just built on that when
Okay.
I changed into freelancing, because I knew I had the experience already. And I think as a freelancer, right, it's like even more important to find that niche, because again, the whole focus is on you as a personal brand. So I just built on the experience really that I already had, and actually like focused in further on small to medium independently owned luxury brands was like the space that I operated in.
Hmm.
Um, and yeah, it was honestly like building on the experience that I had and building on like a sector at that time that I was very, very passionate about.
Okay, very interesting. And then what I wanted to follow up on is when you landed your broader digital marketing slash growth role, how did you know that that was the right fit for you? Because I think in a career shift, it's sometimes it's very scary. Like you're following your gut feeling, but there's always a risk that it doesn't work. So how did you know it was the right place for you?
Yeah, so my first role into like tech and product marketing was at Tez, as I mentioned. I think for me, the main focus at that point in my career really became that I wanted to be at a more kind of cause and mission focused organization. And because Tez are focused on ed tech and really like empowering schools really with the technology that they need to, further education outcomes, that was like a mission that really resonated with me. I think it was a very, actually almost accidentally, but very helpful stepping stone for me from like working in digital marketing to having this hybrid digital growth and product marketing role. And then from there, actually being able to say, like, I've done growth and digital marketing for a long time, and actually I'm ready to like completely specialize in product marketing. I feel like sometimes looking back, these things like you realize that some things, they happen, some things are intentional, but some things almost happen accidentally. And it was by no means like a perfectly aligned role with where I wanted to get to, but it was definitely like a conscious stepping stone in the right direction.
I see. Okay, so now we get to the juicy part, and we're going to fully focus on product marketing. And yeah, thank you for giving us more context on how you got to that role. Today, what would you say your definition of product marketing is? I love to ask this question because I think
Well,
different people have different perspectives of what product marketing is, and I'd
yeah.
love to hear yours.
Yeah. Okay. So I'll share what I think every product marketer should like aspire to be as they move through their career, if that's okay. Because I always like to think forward in that sense. And I think done right, and this is going to sound a bit corporate jargony, but just like hear me out for a second. Like product
Okay.
marketing can really be the strategic linchpin in every organization. And what I mean by that is, And this isn't coming from a place of ego, right? This is coming from the fact that A, we work so closely and with so many different teams and so cross-functionally. And B, we have our finger on the pulse with our sector, our competitors, customers. And then those two things brought together, done right, that's really powerful. That gives us room for a lot of like kind of meaningful influence. So yes, that is how I would define it at this point in my career.
Definitely cross-functional. And do you have an opinion on B2C versus B2B? Do you think it's the same in those different organizations?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think, yes, in my experience, in order to be successful, you need to be as collaborative. I'd say maybe you collaborate, like you dial up the collaboration with different teams differently. Like I think one thing on the B2C side that's been super interesting for me, and which I feel like we're starting to talk about more in the product marketing space now, is the importance of product marketing and brand marketing collaborating together. And that's been awesome because with a B2C focus, I've had much more of an opportunity to do that. Whereas often on the B2B side, it's really like product and growth marketing collaborating together. At least it has been in my experience. So yes, the collaboration piece is still like central, right, to a product marketer, but how much you lean into different teams for me has definitely changed.
Love that. For me, it's definitely the part I love the most about the role. I completely agree with your your the focus on cross functionality in your definition, because it is something people take a bit for granted. Like you're supposed to be like that, but it's actually very challenging to get other people's buy-in, but also to be everywhere all the time, and not miss out on product updates or sales enablement needs, or even the marketing team usually needs your help as well. So it's very, yeah, I think it's challenging, but also it's what I find most stimulating being a product marketer. So can you tell us more about your current responsibilities as head of product marketing at JustGiving? I'm very, very curious.
Yeah, absolutely. So I already mentioned the B2C and B2B split, and I think one thing that at JustGiving that was a very intentional shift for me, say previous roles, was that, so for example, at Blackbaud, I was very focused on, that internal enablement piece in terms of enabling our sales teams, enabling our growth marketing team. Prior to that, at TES, I definitely sat much more closely with the product and engineering teams. So I kind of like felt like a complete shift in that, moving from TES to Blackbaud. Then moving on to JustGiving from Blackbaud, I tried to be quite intentional about shifting from product marketing being like that supporting and enabling role, which is like, of course, very important, to really being more of a leading role in terms of leading company strategy. So for me, I think my goal really is influencing both short-term tactical strategies, so like the day to day, as well as long term strategic plans, like when it comes to annual planning. And not just within the marketing team, again, coming back to that collaborative piece, we have the ability to do this across the business, right? Because a lot of people lean on us, we lean on a lot of business. So we have those, like as product marketers, we have those relationships. So for me, my last year was, I really used that as an opportunity to see the annual planning cycle as a great opportunity to demonstrate how invaluable a role product marketing can play when it comes to company-wide strategic planning. And yeah, more than happy to like dive into that in more detail. But that's kind of been like my shift and focus coming into this role at JustGiving.
I honestly think this is a very refreshing view on product marketing. It's usually perceived as a serving role. So we're servants for every function, but seeing it as a leading or strategic function, to me at least, is very inspiring. So I'd love to dig deeper into this. What how do you think we as product marketers can position ourselves as more strategic individuals in the company rather than just, creating decks and helping everyone with their jobs.
Totally. And you know what? It is like so hard to pull yourself out of that because you want to be delivering on the day to day, right? Of course.
Yeah.
So I would say like let's like really break it down, right? I like to think because we throw the word strategy around a lot, but really like what's at the core of that? I think what's at the core of actually being able to inform strategy is like a deep understanding of ourselves as a business, our market as a whole, our customers, and our competitors, right? And that's down to our ability to like digest huge amounts of data that all of us have access to, but really to distill those into meaningful insights that are actually actionable in some way, right? So, and we do this as product marketers. I think we do it, but we probably don't label it in a specific way. So, like for myself, I've labeled it as an insights-led approach. And I think I'll give you an example actually, which I shared at the Product Marketing Alliance Summit where we met as well. But I'll just reuse it here for your listeners because I think it just like drives home the fact of how we use the words data and insights almost like interchangeably, and why I think actually defining what an insights led approach is like so critical to how we can be more strategic as product marketers. So, I'll just share an example, right? I'll share like a data led example and an insights led example. So, if we say that there's been a 5% year on year decline in active customers on our platform, right? I mean, this is very important information. It's also very alarming, but what would we do with that information, right? But if we dig deeper into that and we try to see, is there like a specific trend or a cohort that's, for example, driving that decline? So let's take a look at that data point again, but dig deeper. So we might find that there's been a 5% year-on-year decline in active customers on our platform, which is being driven by a very specific segment of customers who, for example, are less tech savvy, but we also know that they're very high value once we engage with them. So they essentially require more touch points of engagement. So maybe we can look at customer success at scale program. And that really is you taking like the data point one step further and really digging out the actionable part. And this brings together qualitative data from different parts of the business. But it involves a lot more time and work. And I think that's why often we or companies shy away from this kind of way of working because let's face it, we're all very time poor, like have the perception that we're time poor, right? But I think as product marketers, we're very well positioned, just with the sheer access we have to market and business insights and the sheer access we have to various different stakeholders, to lead with an insight, to take an insight-led approach, and B, like set that as an example for other stakeholders across the business to follow suit. So that's really what a lot of my kind of recent focus at JustGiving has been like centered around, and really like setting an example with this insight-led approach.
Thanks for illustrating that, because I know being data-driven is one of the key PMM skills out there, but looking at it from an insights perspective makes sense. I'm sure it's harder to activate that part of your brain, as you said, I think we naturally do it as PMMs. We're always going to be curious. Like if we see a decline in active customer interactions, we're probably going to be wondering why did this happen and look into it. But doing that constantly should be part of it should be in our nature, and maybe we should label it or be more vocal about it so that can help us be perceived as more strategic and not just we're sharing information with no actions. I read this one statement about like strategic PMMs being able of turning any initiative or any data into point of views. So being very vocal about also what like your opinions from everything you're gathering, whether it's market insights or competitor research. What is your point of view as a product marketer? Because it's not just about sharing the data, it's also providing, I guess we can call it insights now. I think that's pretty meaningful. And I know that you also have resources about this. So tell us more. Where can we find more about your insights-led approach?
Yeah, of course. And I just wanted to take a second just to like go back to your point as well, because I think that is so important, right? It is what drives strategy is having a well-informed viewpoint on things, right? And there's just like a small hop from
Yeah.
data to insight to like enable that, to like unlock that, and for that magic to happen. So yeah, I love what you shared there. Yeah, in terms of resources, so I've used something called, I mean, a lot of you might be familiar with this, but like a market intelligence program, which I think for me, I frame it as a step ahead of like a competitive intelligence program, which of course for a lot of product marketers, we focus very heavily on competitive intelligence. But I see a market intelligence framework as a more comprehensive version of that. So not only are you looking at insights about your competitors, but I like to split it into 4 categories. So you're also looking at insights about the market as a whole, as well as competitors, as well as consumers, and then product as well. So I split it across product, competitor, consumer, and product intelligence, which forms your market intelligence program. So there's that. And then also, I use something called a key plays framework, both of which I'm more than happy to share out with any of your listeners. Reach out to me on LinkedIn, drop me a message on there, and I can share the frameworks out. But also more than happy to talk about them in a little bit more detail, if that'll help.
Yeah, I'd love to learn more about the product intelligence part because I guess market consumers, competitors, usually that's from your readings, your research as a product marketer. But the product part, do you mean understanding more about the ins and outs of the product you're selling? So collaborating with the engineering team a bit more, or do you have a specific approach for that?
Yeah, sure. So I think it's like the product pillar is like quite broad, right? It can cover sector wide, for example, let's say sector wide product and pricing innovation. I think like a good example actually, which comes to mind for me, is like Vinted. They recently announced that they were removing seller fees, right? And eBay quickly had to follow suit at risk of losing market share. So I think like new product categories, like when Uber and Airbnb came onto the market, right? That is all like product intelligence. I think it can really overlap into market intelligence as well. So I wouldn't say like the 4 pillars are like 100% separate. I actually think the interesting stuff happens in the overlap areas between them because, if you see like a new competitor come onto the market, how is that having like a knock-on effect on consumer behavior, for example? And then building those connections and finding those overlaps between your 4 pillars within your market intelligence program, that's really where the interesting stuff happens. Like
Yeah.
going back to your point, that's what helps you build a viewpoint on things and like share those insights back with the business.
Yeah, Haya, thank you so much for sharing your framework with us, and also we will link to it in the show notes, and any collateral that goes out will link to your resources because I attended Haya's talk at the PMA summit, and I was just like, okay, I want to learn more about this. So the fact that I can ask you questions about it live is great, but I think also visually having that handy is really, really helpful, especially if you're already in your product marketing role and you want to apply this insights-led framework. I definitely encourage you to look at the resources and reach out to Haya. She's very friendly, I promise you. Okay, next question. This is more about the to the point about being more strategic. If you'd have to give a tip to product marketers out there to start something today, like a small step they can take today to get closer to that strategic approach, what would you share with us?
Yeah, that's a really good question because I think it can feel very like nebulous and overwhelming, right? So I would say remember that, as product marketers, we have the skill set to do this, right? We have the skill set to like dig into the data, dig into insights. We have the relationships to influence like a broad range of stakeholders. So I think if you want to, where I would start is with, for example, even if you don't feel like you're in a place to target to tackle market intelligence as a whole. Start with your competitor intelligence. Start with that and make the intel. I think a huge part of insight gathering is curation, right? So make your competitive
Mhm.
intel as digestible and actionable as possible for stakeholders. In my experience, in the various different roles that I've been in, often, even competitive intel will be very kind of like fractured and siloed across the business. So be the person who brings that together, makes it as digestible as possible, and like make suggestions, like actionable suggestions to your stakeholders off the back of that. And from there, share it through whichever channels you find are most appropriate. You might want to tailor it to different stakeholder groups as well, right? You might want to surface different insights to your account managers versus executive leadership. And, that's
Yeah.
also a great opportunity for visibility. And then I would say from there, once you're feeling like you're in a good place with how you're sharing out market intel, competitive intel, layer the rest of the market intel that we talked about on top of that. And do not feel like you need to do it all on your own. Like this data, this information, it exists within people's minds and across the business. You are the person like bringing it together and making sense of it all, right? And there's definitely a huge, as there always is for us, like a huge collaborative element to it. So don't let the overwhelm get you down.
100%. Also, don't neglect internal resources. It's
No.
something we take for granted sometimes. Like, bring your sales team in a meeting room and just ask them a bunch of questions on their customer interactions, what they know about the market, the industry. I personally find that helpful. And usually they are pretty collaborative. So,
Yeah,
yeah,
totally.
um, love that tip. I have one final question for you, which is, so I was skeptical to ask this because, but then you brought it up, which it's the buzzword imposter syndrome. You brought it up earlier, and I wanted to follow up on it because I think I mean, this is me sharing my personal experience with you, a huge challenge I've been facing, especially when I change sector or industry as a PMM. It's feeling like an imposter slash fraud, because I don't know anything about the industry, or I'm not, um, yeah, maybe I'm not the best person for the job because of the lack of background or context I have on the industry. I still believe that's something you can learn and that's okay. But for some reason, I do go through imposter syndrome. Is there any advice you have for maybe listeners who also feel this way? And yeah, more specific question I was going to ask you is there a way you can measure the success of a framework like this one, the insights led approach? Do you have, yeah, any advice? I'm taking it.
Yeah, of course. No, and thank you for being like, so open and honest about that. And gosh, there has been so many times in my life, right, where that imposter syndrome just like dials up. I think for me, in my personal experience, like a way to kind of counteract that is like, again, like really leaning in to your network and like your community. I think like mentorship and coaching is like a great way to do that. But I think beyond that, again, just speaking to a lot of people to familiarize yourself with the sector, like especially in a remote world, I think still like nothing compares to like turning up to like an in-person industry event. And I think at the start of a role, when you're familiarizing with yourself with a new industry, that is like the quickest, it's almost like an accelerator, right? It's like the quickest way to kind of like completely nip that imposter syndrome in the bud by
Yeah,
just going to, as many events as you can and like completely immersing yourself in that space. And again, we take it for granted, but really I would say it's just like speaking to as many people as possible, because let's be honest, like we all as humans, we love being asked for advice, right? So if we were to reach out to somebody for like a coffee catch up to learn more about their experience because you really admire them in a new sector that you're in, I mean, I would say like 9 times out of 10, they're not going to turn us down, right? So I think really speaking to people as broadly as possible, both within your company but outside as well, to accelerate your learning, like that is the sure shot way of like nipping that imposter syndrome in the bud. And I've completely forgotten what the second part of your question was. So you're gonna have to remind me.
no worries. Yeah, how can you measure the success of incorporating the insights-led approach in your product marketing activities?
Yeah, it is such an interesting one. And I think you and I spoke about this, didn't we, at the
Yeah.
conference as well, in terms of like measurability is such an interesting one for product marketers. I think in terms, so I think there's like two sides to this, right? In terms of the market intelligence and like the insights led approach, I think in itself, it probably isn't measurable, say, in terms of like uptick in revenue, for example. But I think like the proof is in the pudding in terms of like the value it's going to drive. I think sometimes we almost have to like view ourselves as, for example, like the finance department in a company make a very critical, important decisions, but they're not necessarily directly driving revenue themselves, right? So I always kind of fall back to that example. I think in some cases, not in all cases, product marketing is very similar. We prove our value, maybe not always, sometimes for sure, through commercial KPIs, but just in our ability to bring that level of insight to the table. That's not always the case,
Yeah.
right? I think with like specific product and feature launches, that is 100% measurable in terms of commercial and revenue impact and customer adoption, etc. In terms of something like this, I'd say less like quantifiable, but like definitely in terms of the bringing together of people and I'd say like the focus that this kind of approach brings, I think is going to be like a better measure of its value rather than any kind of commercial KPIs.
Oh my God, that resonates with me so much. Like finding focus, it's such a challenge, especially in smaller organizations, in startups where you can do everything and you can contribute to so many different parts. So I really like that. I'm also excited to start applying this insights-led approach. As I told you, I just started this new job, so this is a great way to start. I'm
Wow.
definitely going to look at your resources. Yeah, thank you so much, Haya, for joining me. It was really, really good talking to you, and also very inspiring hearing from your incredible journey to now being at JustGiving. Thank you for sharing your experience.
Of course. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.